Good afternoon, and welcome to the series on equity and poverty in the pandemic. My name is Doris Carbonell Medina, and I'm the project director of the Empire State Poverty Reduction Initiative, or ESPRI, with the United Way of Buffalo and Erie County. The United Way of Buffalo and Erie County extends a warm welcome to all those online, community leaders, stakeholders, volunteers, friends, and colleagues. We recognize these are difficult times in our community and in our nation, and there's so much to do and to accomplish, and we thank you for setting time aside to be part of this learning community today. At this time, I'd like to introduce to you Ms. Miranda Morales. She is a member of our marketing and communications team. Miranda.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining today. We have a great turnout. It is wonderful to be with you all. So I just wanted to take a moment to sort of talk about the new feature that we're using today. I don't know if everyone here has been familiar, but we're using Zoom Webinar. So it looks a little bit different than regular Zoom because only our panelists will be seen and heard. If you can't see yourself or hear yourself, that's why your camera and audio has been disabled. So we can only focus on the panelists today. But we do have a couple options for you if you'd like to ask some questions during the presentations here. You can use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. Me and the team here will be monitoring those questions throughout the conversation, and we will have an opportunity for Q&A after each panelist is done speaking. So put in your questions there while they're fresh in your mind, and we will address them when the time comes, or any other concerns you have. So thank you for joining our Zoom webinar, and I'm going to turn it back over to Doris.
Thank you, Miranda. And we begin our meetings by giving thanks to the ancestors of the Iroquois Nation for this land, and honor and acknowledge the culture and sacrifice of the Haudenosaunee people, and acknowledge the First Nations people and the struggle for land, human rights, and dignity over the centuries. We give thanks for those represented here today and for our collective faiths, and ask for wisdom, unity, and peace as we move forward with our agenda. Since the inception of the public health crisis, we've convened these webinars as part of our community impact work of the Poverty Initiative to lift up the needs of the local community and share information about what is occurring on the front lines as a result of COVID-19 and the multiple racial inequities that exist in our region and the exacerbation of those persistent social health and educational disparities due to COVID-19, especially the impact the pandemic has had on Black, Indigenous, and people of color in our community, our vulnerable populations, and those struggling and living in financial hardship. This month, we will focus on community, economic, and social needs. And in order to get a sense of what this looks like, we invited 211, who helps to operate a lifeline in our community and is always in the forefront of these efforts. And I'd like to introduce to you at this time, Ms. Kelly Dodd, the Director of Contact Services for 211 with Visually Impaired Advancement, or VIA. Ms. Kelly, welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Doris. Hi, everyone. I am going to provide a brief presentation with an overview of what 211 is and how it serves the community, and also some of the needs that we've heard from the community since we've been in the COVID-19 pandemic. So with that, I'm going to attempt to share my screen. Okay, did that work, ladies? Can you give me a head shake, Kelly? Cool, great.
Thank you.
Thank you. All right, so what is 211? For those of you that don't know, 211 is a 3-digit phone number that connects folks to services in their community. So it's just 3 digits when you call, like 911 or 411, but you're calling 211. And you're actually going to talk to a real live person. 211 is also a website. So there's 211WNY locally and 211.org nationally. And then 211 is also a database of community services. And then the really special thing about 211 is that it's not just a phone number, it's not just a website or a database, but it's actually a person or a community resource specialist that you get to talk to when you call 211. So this person is here, they're going to listen to you, they're going to help you identify your needs, help you problem solve, and help you find a solution that is specific to your situation. So 211 provides a single point of access to the community's full range of health and social services. It's personal and confidential. So like I mentioned, you are going to talk to a real live person when you call 211. And it's someone who's going to ask you some questions about your situation, help you understand what's really going on, talk about what your options are, and connect you to those supports and services. 211 is an easy to remember phone number, and 211 is available all across New York State, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and about 95% of the US population has access to a 211 serving their community. So this is really important to know for those of us who have friends and family in other parts of the country, that we find ourselves even more strained to support as travel restrictions continue to grow. So for example, if you have elderly parents that are living in Florida and you're concerned about them and want to make sure that they are accessing services, you can call 211 and get connected to us, and we can connect you to the 211 that serves their community in Florida.
Ms. Kelly, please forgive me for interrupting you. However, we do hear some crackly sounds, and I think your microphone is coming in and out. Not certain why. I know when we tested, you were fine, but it may help if you have a direct connection. Thank you so much.
I'm switching to a headset right now, so let me see if that helps.
Thank you everyone for your patience. Always exciting.
So I'm on the headset right now. Is that any better?
That's much better. Thank you so much, Kelly.
Okay, great. My vanity will suffer, but the sound quality will be better. So where was I? So yeah, about 95% of the US population has access to a 211 serving their community. And we just saw an announcement. 211 is also available in most of Canada. We just saw an announcement that the federal government in Canada is going to support making sure that 211 is available nationwide. So what kinds of supports and services are available through 211? It's kind of a soup to nuts of all of the government and social service agencies' offerings. So everything from meeting basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, housing services, to higher level supports like counseling, legal services, information for schools, faith organizations, education and training programs, services for populations, specific populations, including people with disabilities or veterans, early childhood, etc. So when folks call us, they might have one specific need in mind that they're looking for, but through conversation with a community resource specialist, we can identify additional or underlying needs and connect them to a wide variety of services to really address some of those root issues that they're experiencing. So 211 locally, we are served by 211 Western New York, which covers 7 Western New York counties. So I know Western New York is traditionally thought of as 8 counties. Allegheny County in 211 land is served by the 211 of the Finger Lakes. So what kind of questions do folks call us with? All kinds of life challenges that we've all experienced at one time or another. Where can I get help for my grandson with school? How do I find a job? What if I'm looking for services for a friend or relative who's suffering from mental illness? where can I get help filling out all of this paperwork and forms? So these are some of the things that even in normal times can be challenging to address. And during the current circumstances under COVID are even more challenging as we are navigating remote access to resources. 211 is available 24/7, including during a time of crisis such as we are in now. So what are some of the different types of services that folks will call for or questions that they'll ask about during a crisis? Things like, where do I get my COVID-19 test? Is there an area shelter for families during a snowstorm? Or my mom is snowed in and I live in Florida, but she lives up north and I can't get any food to her. Can you help? Is there help available? Or a public health emergency, unlike the one we're in now, maybe just a time limited thing. Hey, I ate at that restaurant that had the Hep C outbreak. Do I need to get a shot? Those are the kinds of things that we get calls about at 211, and we'll partner with local government to make sure that we're getting folks the right answers to those questions. 211 also partners with Help Me Grow to make sure that kids have the best opportunities early in life. So we are connecting them to services for 0 to 5 population to make sure that that parents have those supports during those early years when the brain is doing the most development. So as I mentioned, 211 is available by phone, online, but it's also available by text. So folks can text us for two-way communication Monday through Friday, 8:30 to 3:30, and we'll have a conversation with them via text, just like we would over the phone. Here's a sampling of some of the text messages we received during Thanksgiving last year. Folks were really grateful just to be able to talk to someone and know that there was help available anytime, 24/7. And it was really gratifying to come in and see those messages. So this is a little graph of the 211 call volume. You can see it's relatively steady up until March 16th of 2020. So we would have peaks and valleys and they were seasonal. We have high points for the free tax prep services that are available in the community to households that make less than $66,000 a year. And then we'll also have peaks during the holiday seasons when families are under extra stress to meet the needs and expectations that everyone has during the holidays. In March, when the pandemic onset happened, we experienced a surge in the calls to 211. So it was not just folks who were already on the edge, but it also was people who had suddenly lost their job and had no idea where they were going to get their next paycheck and no idea how they were going to feed their families or stay safe. So folks were calling and we were triaging them. We were helping to let them know what services are available through the county, through government agencies, temporary benefits, food stamps, things like that, as well as unemployment assistance. And those were challenging times to negotiate. Just to give you a sample of some of the calls that we got, there was one woman that called from Erie County March 23rd. She was a woman in her 50s and she called 211 for assistance. She needed to file for public assistance with the county and was told to go to the county's website to fill out a form to apply. However, in order to do that, she would need to print the forms and the caller did not have access to a printer at home. I think many of us were in that case in March, or were in that situation. So the staff member took a look, the 211 staff member took a look at the My Benefits website and did not see where you could apply for the temporary assistance. So she took it upon herself to print off the paperwork and mail it to the client so that the client had the best chance of success at applying for that assistance. If we look at later in the pandemic, in May, there was a caller who was concerned that she would be forced to take the COVID-19 vaccine when it was available. Our community resource specialist provided facts and examples of good sources of information. The caller heard most of the information on the radio and from a friend, and she became more relaxed during the call as she was provided those reliable resources. She was still concerned, but at the conclusion of the call, she had more verified information, and she was also provided with the COVID-19 emotional support helpline for more assistance if she needed it. The 211 specialist spent 29 minutes on the phone with this caller, so really allowing people to talk through the challenges that they're facing and be heard. A few weeks later in May, we had a caller who was 57, and he and his wife were taking care of their grandchildren because the parents were in the healthcare field and they were staying away because they didn't want to risk giving the COVID-19 virus to the kids and the grandparents who were the caregivers. He was requesting a food pantry because now he had a larger household to support. So we were able to provide them those resources for food assistance. So during this time of COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of the challenges that we would see from our community members were just exacerbated by the limited resources that were available. So this is the needs map of callers from Western New York to 211. You can see they're highly concentrated in the city of Buffalo in Erie County. And then here's a report across the last 6 years of generally what are the top needs that we hear at 211. And there's a very fine print on there, so I'll read it off to you. So tax preparation, homeless shelter, directory assistance, food pantries, rent payment assistance, and holiday gifts and toys. If we narrow that focus to just the calls that we've received since March 16th through a couple of days ago, there was a slight shift in the focus of the needs from the community. Number 1, homeless shelter. 2, rent payment assistance. 3, tax preparation services. That was especially challenging this year with most of the sites closing down before the traditional tax season ended, and most of the tax volunteers in our community being seniors and not comfortable seeing the taxpayers who needed their assistance. Number 3, food pantries. 4, directory assistance. And number 6, COVID-19 control. So we received a lot of calls, especially early on, from folks who needed that PPE, folks who needed cleaning supplies, bleach, disinfectant, things like that, and just didn't have them. The community was quickly mobilized to meet those needs. So that's the end of the presentation from 211. I can stop or take questions, or I can pass it back to you, Miranda or Doris.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks so much. I know that you just referenced all of these calls that came in with respect to cleaning supplies, bleach, disinfectant. Those items are extremely expensive. How was it that our community was able to garner its resources and deliver those supplies to folks in need? Can you give us a sense of who was involved and how it was that these items were distributed?
Yeah, so the food bank had as much as there were folks who were not able to leave their houses due to pre-existing conditions and fear, there were also others who stepped forward in the City of Good Neighbors and offered volunteer services to do what they could and what they were comfortable with. So the food bank mobilized volunteers to support delivery services and Meals on Wheels. There were efforts to promote donations. And then the philanthropy community really did come forward with providing resources to nonprofits to meet the needs of the clients that they typically see, as well as the clients that they were newly gaining.
Thank you. And so I appreciate the overview of how it is that 211 works, but tell me, how do you know that the referral source was actually able to assist the individual? Can you provide an idea to our listening audience, the technology that you use and some of your follow-up at 211?
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned, we have a comprehensive community resource database, which has over 5,000 agency and program records, providing over 10,000 services within the 7-county region. We update that database annually. And during the onset of the pandemic, we reached out to all of the agencies and providers and asked that they respond to us with an update of what their current capacity and services are, if they were open or closed, so that when we were providing responses to the community, we were providing accurate referrals. 211 also offers follow-up service. So if the person is interested, we'll take a phone number and first name and give them a call back to see if the resources we provided them were able to assist them. So there's a feedback loop there as well.
Well, that's very important to know. Um, I don't see any questions in the question box, but you led with data, as we often do, and we know that disaggregated data in particular is really so important to helping us drill down on disparities in our community. You did mention that many of the calls were actually received from the urban metropolis, Buffalo, the city of Buffalo, as well as Erie County. Uh, how can you help our community with determining actually who is it that is calling, and who, what are those greatest needs based upon race and other identifiable factors, so we can kind of drill down and get a sense of where the needs are, and use that data to help inform future policies and practices, certainly applications for um, monetary support to really address some of the disparities and make certain that we've got those resources, and that we're able to, prove it, right, Kelly? Because data is so essential to racial equity.
Mhm. Yeah, so traditionally, 211 is confidential and anonymous, so we're not collecting necessarily personally identifiable information from our community members who call us. One of the key pieces of information that we do collect from most of the callers, however, is their zip code. And we know how zip code determines what services are available, and zip code determines, how healthy you may or may not be and what access you have to food, how old you might grow up to be. So there are some inferences that we can draw based on the zip codes of who's calling us. And then we also track what the needs are. So I was able to provide that feedback and those reports based on the tracking that we do of what those identified needs are for the callers that call us from the community. We are working with the City of Buffalo and Erie County to provide centralized intake for the rent and mortgage assistance program. So for that program in particular, we are collecting very specific and personally identifiable information from the community members, including the HUD mandated identifiable fields from community members as well. So we will have information about age, race, gender, ethnicity, etc., that will be available at the end of the time period.
Well, we definitely look forward to that. And we know that, disaggregated data on the basis of race really does provide an informed picture to funders, institutions such as universities, and prospective partners in going out and finding resources to bring to our area to address many of our disparities. Um, so I would like to be able, we do have a question here in the chat and in the question box, and it talks about who actually is answering these calls. What is their training, and how are they able to build such great rapport with folks who call in and
Sure.
need help?
Great question. So, 211 locally is offered by VIA, formerly known as the Olmsted Center for Sight, the Visually Impaired Advancement. So about half of my staff are blind or visually impaired. 211 aligns with VIA's mission because it provides employment opportunities for people who have vision disabilities. As far as qualifications, we look for folks who have experience in customer service and health and human services. Everyone goes through a training which is informed by AIRS, the Alliance of Information and Referral Services, which is the professional body that certifies agencies as well as individuals to provide information and referral, which is what 211 does.
Okay, that is great. So,
Thanks.
folks with experience, folks with trauma-informed care training, and really able to understand um, what some of the hardships are that our folks in the community are living with. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Kelly. And you know, I think that your overview of some of those calls, you know, around, you know, just real day-to-day concerns that people have about the virus are so important to highlight because we know that you know, many folks in our community are isolated. They're kind of living in their silos, you know, with very little travel. And so, you know, thank you so much for providing this service in our community and for being you know, consistent and persistent in ensuring that this service continues to be funded in our community. So, you know, it just provides us with an overview of really what people are worried about these days.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, when folks call 211, it really provides them an opportunity to access the wider community, the wide variety of services that are available in the community. So whereas maybe you would ask a friend or a relative or even a counselor for a resource for a problem, you would be limited by their knowledge base. When you call 211 for looking for assistance, you really have the opportunity to access any of the services that might be available to you in the community. I did see one other question in the chat, and it was, are all languages represented? So we do use a phone translation service that provides access to over 170 different languages.
All right, excellent. Um, and you know, it's just indicative of really the atmosphere that we live in. I've heard so many individuals talk about how really you know, everything is not okay, and things are really not normal. I mean, we really are living in a very unique historical period when there is so much stress and you know, such anxiety and really individuals are beginning to be weathered and worn. And it's so important to highlight the social and emotional impact, um, you know, that the virus is having on our people. So thank you so much, Kelly Dodd, for that overview. And it really just provides a great segue to the constructive conversation around, you know, what is the social and emotional impact that not only this environment and COVID-19 is having in our community, but more specifically on, you know, our vulnerable populations, the folks that have to deal with structural racism on a daily basis since pretty much the day that they were born. And so it's crucial, you know, that we begin to look at these issues, you know, in a 360 manner and to really talk about, you know, how people are faring in terms of their mental health and the impact that structural racism has on communities of color. And there's no two individuals that are more learned in this area than our next speakers, which are Ms. Kelly Marie Wooford of ECMC. She is the Community Engagement Director there, and the CEO of Front Seat Life, LLC, and Dr. Kelly Lucci, who is the CEO of Lucid Pathways, LLC. And so welcome, ladies, and thank you so much, Ms. Kelly Marie, for leading this really critical conversation around the social emotional impact that structural racism has on Black and Brown folks, and how that shows up in our mental health, in our bodies. Miss Kelly,
Thank
Marie.
you so much, Doris. Thank you all for being here today. It is always an honor, because when we begin to address the issues, the root causes of racism, the root causes of poverty, we are taking a deep dive, right? We're not talking about the things that we see, and it's about all of the things that we don't see. We're not just talking about feeding people so that they're not hungry. We're talking about why people are hungry in the first place. And when we are looking at mental health, it's not just the symptoms, so the things that people see, it's the systems, right? And that was brought back to my attention. It was something that I've said in a previous training, and it was brought back to my attention that those were my words. And I'm like, I like that because it's true, and I'm going to use it more often. So we really have to look at the systems. But while we're looking at the systems, so the machines that are in place that are really the root cause of poverty and the root cause of racism, we still have to address the symptoms, right? We have people in crisis, and crisis looks the same now as it did a year ago, right? Crisis is crisis. It's the issue that more people are in crisis. We as a community, and when I say community, I mean joint Western New York community at minimum, let alone the world. So we'll focus our conversation on the Western New York community. When we are addressing racism and when we're addressing poverty, stress shows up as stress is going to show up. It's going to look the same. Heart palpitations and confusion, in thought process, too much sleeping, not enough sleeping, too much eating, not enough eating. Like, those symptoms are going to be the same. Again, it is just more people that are experiencing those symptoms. And then when we look at how racism plays out in the lives of Black and Brown people, we have to look at really, I'll say two areas. One, the micro area, and one, the macro area of the manifestation of racism. So how does it look in my day-to-day life as a Black woman living in Western New York? It looks like me living 8 to 12 years less than my white counterpart because I was born Black. So race and place mean a whole lot when we're talking about racism and poverty. How does that look on a larger scale? We are looking at increased hospitalizations because of high blood pressure and diabetes and stroke, heart disease. And these things have a direct relationship to both poverty and racism. Here in the United States and in Western New York, poverty is really just a symptom of racism. Now, that may manifest differently in different countries, and so I'm not here to talk about worldwide poverty issues, right? But how it looks here in Western New York, it is based in a very systemic lens of racism. And so I encourage you. I saw Felicia Beard in the list of participants, and a couple other folks that are training in these issues, right? And so what I don't want to do is repeat what they teach, right? There are some classes that are in existence. There are some trainings out there that I encourage people to take. I believe many of the folks in the call today have taken those classes. So we need to be aware of of how we address the conversation, how we address trainings, in that we're not repetitive. We're not repeating the same things over and over again, because that means we're not actually making enough progress. We all don't need to be in a 101 class or in a 200 level class again and again and again, unless you fail. And then yes, go back and start at the basics. But once you have the basics and understand redlining, once you understand, the banking system, once you understand, voter suppression, once you understand, the prison, the pre-K to prison pipeline, like those are systems that exist. And regardless of, in my opinion, regardless of your opinion, these are factual institutions that are in place, right? Things were written in a very specific way so that we end up where we are today. It's not happenstance that more people are stressed out. It's not surprising that racism exists. And if it is surprising, again, there are some 101 level classes that exist, and I encourage you to take those. I encourage you to read. I encourage you to do the work. We all have to do the work. And so on a larger scale, when it looks at addressing the symptoms, a lot of times I hear, so what do I do now? Like, what happens next? I hear that, I'm white, I'm horrible, this is a bad thing, and it's my fault, right? That we need to go back then to the 101 class, because that is not the case. That is not the point, that is not the purpose, nor should that be the message that's coming across. And so what I want to do is just take a few minutes and talk about the two sides of mental health. Yes, mental health as it relates to people of color, but also mental health in this lens of racism and how it relates to white folks. And I believe we are in a place where we have to allow people to have safe conversations where they feel safe. So that means, we have to start having, Black people have safe spaces. Like, we will create some safe places where white folks don't even know that it exists, right? So white people need to start creating safe spaces so that you can have conversations without worrying about being canceled, without worrying about losing your job, without worrying about, the effects it's going to have on your family. We have to be able to have these conversations in safe places. We have to be able to say that it is okay to not know. We have to be able to say it's okay for the body to react to stress the way the body reacts to stress. I'm sleeping so much because we are in the middle of a hot mess, and my body's natural reaction is to sleep through a hot mess, right? So we have more people that are experiencing more issues, and we have to now change the paradigm. We have to switch the way that we are addressing things that have been in existence, at least here in America, for the last 400 years, right? So I am encouraging people, as Kelly and I have this conversation, to put your questions in the comments. I believe you can send your questions directly to the panelists, and be amongst the five of us, this is a safe place. So we don't have to say your name, you don't have to give you credit for your question, but we need to be able to cultivate places where people can ask honest questions without fear of repercussion. There's no way we can move forward if we can't have those honest conversations and then be able to debrief. So I am built in a way that I am able to talk about race. I am able to talk about mental health. I'm able to talk about sexual violence. I'm able to tell my story. And I am okay with doing that on a repetitive path, having that conversation again and again and again. Most people are not built in that way, right? The re-traumatizing effects of talking about racism, the exhaustion that both minorities and white folks have from dealing with race is very real. And the more we expose people to these conversations, the more we open up the door, the more we look to make changes, we have to provide methods to actually address the individual root causes. So Kelly is going to talk about self-care and what that looks like and why it's important, no matter where you fit on the spectrum, that you take care of yourself, right? No one should feel ashamed because of how they were born, regardless of race, gender identity, religion, like that. We need to be inclusive of our understanding that no one should feel ashamed of how they were born, right? It's just a bunch of genes that were thrown in a bag and ta-da, here you are, right? But with that comes some responsibility simply because of how and where you were born. That's really the foundation of why we all are in this room. We were all born in different places. And because of that, we have different vantage points. We're able to see things in different ways. We have to be able to bring all of those pieces together and discuss how we get out of this situation together. So there are a lot of policymakers within their organizations in the room today. So one of the questions you may have is, my organization has diversity and inclusion officer, or we do training, we have conversations. That's great. But the people that are leading those trainings within your organization, what do you have in place for them to be able to address the issues that they are speaking about over and over and over again? What backups do you have in place for the manager that is understanding for the first time how to have these conversations with their employees, with their staff members? How do you recognize a microaggression? And what do I then do if I'm the one, I'm the perpetrator of the microaggressions? How do I go back and apologize to every Black person that I've ever met and used a microaggression with? The answer to that is no, right? But it is understanding that it is okay to feel confused. It is okay to feel lost. It is okay not to understand what the next step in the process is, because we have never, ever, any of us, been in this place ever before, right? We have some best practices that we can try and implement. When you look at something like cancel culture, this notion that because someone has said something or done something wrong, that we no longer affiliate with that person. That might have worked 2 years ago, right? But that cannot work this way now. We have to be able to move forward, have these conversations, and heal. And the only way you can heal and have the conversations is if it's okay to actually have the conversations, and to be able to then focus on the personal needs you may have, dealing with the effects of racism, dealing with the effects of COVID-19 and the pandemic. Right, so I want to hand everything over to Kelly so that we have enough time to be able to talk about some of those methods of self-care and why self-care is actually important, and then open it up. Hopefully we get some questions in the chat box. Kel?
Thank you, Kelly. And thank you, other Kelly. And of course, Doris, thank you so much for the opportunity to share with our audience this afternoon about the importance of self-care. First, I'd like to mention that self-care is a word that was tossed around by many people prior to COVID. A lot of people shied away from it or said, oh gosh, that's selfish. And it's really not. But for those people who did not understand the importance of self-care prior to COVID, certainly, in the wake of COVID, people are identifying what it is, recognizing that it's needed, and making certain that they take part in it. We are acting like life is back to normal, particularly in the wonderful state of New York. We are blessed. I just saw a stat where New York State is the second safest in the country in terms of having the lowest number of people affected by COVID right now. However, we are not back to normal. And I think I heard someone use a great analogy, which is we basically just acted like we just took the light switch, turned the light back on, and all is well. And it is not. it's kind of more so like if you've ever had a light with a sliding scale where you can adjust the light. And I don't know if you've had this experience, but the struggle has always been like you turn it up a little bit too much and then, it's too bright, then not bright enough, and it varies. And I think that's how everyone is feeling as we continue to push through. And I like to use the word through because it denotes progression. The blessing in New York State is yes, we've made so much progress and we want to continue making the progress. But the reality is we are still living in a pandemic. And for most of us on this call, we have never had to use the word pandemic in the present tense as if we are living through it until now. And so both Kelly and Kelly did a great job talking. Kelly Dodd talking about 211 and the wonderful services that are available to members of the community. And then Kelly Woodford talking about the root causes of systemic racism and poverty. Um, I the lens from which I will be speaking is one of an educator and a counselor. I work in a school every day. And when I tell you that we need to make certain that we are checking in with our children along with ourselves, I cannot stress that enough. It's to the point now where our children are not just talking about the stress that they are under, but they are also talking about the stress that they are feeling their parents are working through. And I want to really talk about like what it looks like. And maybe that'll help people to understand why it is so important to engage in self care. There are people walking around, and I hear the same words repeatedly used. I'm tired. I'm exhausted. I'm overwhelmed. I'm angry. I'm confused. I just don't know. Kelly Woodford mentioned a few minutes ago, not having the answer. And those are all natural responses and natural feelings that people are feeling during this difficult time. Now, self care for a lot of people, they hear self, they hear care, and they're like, oh, that's selfish. You're not supposed to put yourself first. But, when you go back to the analogy of when you're on the airplane, and if you have to grab for your oxygen mask, who are you supposed to put that mask on first? Your loved ones or yourself? You got to take care of yourself first so that you are then able to help other people. And the same holds true with self care. It is vitally important, vitally important. And that means everything from sometimes turning off the gadgets, sometimes, just closing the laptop. I talked about this last week in a program discussion, taking a mental health day. That's something else that people are just so uncomfortable with. They don't mind taking it if physically, if they have a cold or they're running a fever, but they have a difficult time taking or even using the word mental health, still a stigma there. And then a mental health day, what is that? We all need it and we all should take it. So, in addition to feeling overwhelmed, tired, I can tell you I had 4 students in my office today, and each student out of the 6 in total that were in my office, 4 of them broke down. And it's just a repeated expression, the feeling of I'm overwhelmed. We're acting like we are back to normal. The students will say to me, they're walking into the school, and the anticipation is, okay, school, we're going back to school, we're going back to normal. And then there's a constant reminder from the time that the students get on the bus, everyone's wearing a mask, you got to sit 6 feet apart, you walk through the building, you got to get your temperature checked. It's a lot. And certainly as adults, it's a lot because whether you have children or not, I'm sure there is some person or probably several people with whom you are responsible or you are helping to care for or you're concerned about their welfare and you are literally seeing how it is impacting them, which means not only are you dealing with your own struggles, but you are seeing the struggles of others. We as a society have to push past the notion that Self-care is not something that you should really do. Or self-care, if you really had your life in order, you would not need to practice it. And in actuality, it's just the opposite. Self-care is needed to keep some order in your life. Self-care means establishing a routine. And I'm honestly seeing this. The greatest struggle, whether it's with my students, even my honor students, along with parents, along with adults, my clients, is that if they don't have a set routine, along with setting boundaries, they're having a very difficult time in this pandemic era. So it is important to set a schedule, set a routine. And when you find yourself out of sync, and things are going to happen, absolutely. But when you find yourself continuously off schedule, out of sync, that's a reminder it's time to slow down, which may mean turning off the gadgets, or at least setting a time that you are going to turn off the gadgets. Because I think for most of us who worked, we were impacted at some time or another when COVID hit, whether it was just for a couple of weeks, from the onset of COVID, or many people are still working from home. I'm sure you've noticed that the means of communication has greatly changed. I admit I never even participated in a Zoom meeting until I think it was March 15th was my first one, and now it's just the norm, which is great. And it has allowed a lot of people to maintain their jobs or continue working in a safer environment. But what I see the big challenge with that is that for many people, they're zoomed out. You're continuously having meeting after meeting after meeting. Everyone wants to meet now because in their mind they think it, oh, it's convenient, or you're at home, or you're in a safe place, so you won't mind meeting. It's okay to say no. No is, I think, the most powerful word to use when we are engaging in self-care. But we as human beings have a very difficult time, or many of us, with saying no.
Ms. Kelly.
Yes.
Hi, I have a question for you.
Yes.
And it really does relate to sort of the everyday. We've talked about our place, where we're born, how that really makes a difference in terms of our lifespan, our opportunities. In preparation for today's talk, I read a little bit of Mary Frances Winter's book, Black Fatigue. And, we're talking about sort of what's different in the pandemic, but what do you say to folks who, have experienced, the feeling of knowing what it is to be different, and, growing up with a continuum of insults and spears and attacks, and sort of wearing down that fatigue. And how would you recommend that those folks right now, take care of themselves, right? I know it's great to take a mental health day, and certainly to say no, as difficult as it is. I think that, most of us are just going to keep on keeping on, right? What are some of those special things, that folks do that really will help to nourish their soul and their heart, to sort of give them strength to be able to take on, whatever challenges they're taking on, always in the everyday, but especially now?
I think the key word, no pun intended, is self. I think we need to, and I think for a lot of people, I think the silver lining. Of course, we're not going to say that COVID by no means was a positive thing to happen to us worldwide. But the silver lining, always looking for, okay, how can I grow? What can I learn from this? Is really turning inward and focusing on self. I've noticed that a lot of people have picked up crafts. I know a lot of people have started reading again for pleasure, or they've wanted to learn, especially with the civil unrest and hearing about so many of the disparities, not just due to COVID and health related, but with regards to education. People are reading more. I think even our young people are taking more time out for themselves and devoting time for self and learning about who they are as individuals. And I think it's important, even as adults, to allow some me time. Again, we have such a difficult time doing that or saying that as if it's selfish and it's unwarranted, when in actuality it is, especially during these times of such unrest, such confusion. I've heard from people like, I really didn't have any idea that life was really like this for so many people. Well, it's time to, stop with the, such a busy schedule, slow down and take some time for self, and not just in terms of, resting and relaxation, but learn about oneself, learn about your culture, reuniting with family, with friends, with like-minded friends, thinking about how can we as a people, help close the many gaps that exist, that unfortunately, due to COVID, due to the civil unrest, due to the civil injustices that continue to grow in America, how can we also be part of the solution? And so I am seeing some great things where people are coming together, pulling together their resources, and thinking about how they too can contribute to their community and uplifting their community.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. And we do have a great question that was put in the chat. It's really responsive to Ms. Kelly Marie, and it really talks about being honest and the ability to vent, the ability to express ourselves, and then specifically that Black people are just tired. Bad stuff happens all the time, but when it hits the fan, Black folks are the ones that are most affected, and they are tired.
Yes.
Um,
And it's okay to say that. It is okay to say we are tired. It is okay to say we're fed up. And it is okay to say we're angry. And I am saying that as a Black woman. Am I offended? Absolutely. But the next time that someone says, oh, you seem angry, actually, I wasn't, but I am now. I have a right to be angry. And we need to be able to articulate that and feel comfortable with expressing that. No more tiptoeing around. The problem is, and this is with self-care, is self-expression and being comfortable with oneself. And that means being comfortable with expressing our true emotion.
Absolutely.
We've been silent for too long, and it's physically not healthy, and it also takes its toll tremendously on mental health. And all that we as people of color, as Black people, have been through, and then there's an additional layer to being a Black female. And so the awakening has taken place, and we as women do not need we don't need to shy from it. We don't need to be ashamed of it. We hold our heads high and say, enough is enough. These are the reasons why. And sometimes you need to remind people. They may not want to hear it, but we certainly can remind them. These are just a few of the reasons why I have a valid reason to be angry.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. I did mention, Black Fatigue, the book in particular. Miss Mary Frances Winters is actually, a native of this area. She was born and raised in Niagara Falls, and she talks about, her husband, dying, many years ago in his sort of mid to late 40s. And she talks about, all that he had to withstand, to be a Black male engineer at the specific employer that he was in. And the development of this heart condition, and it wasn't nascent in his family. It certainly wasn't, a trait that anyone was certainly expecting to develop as a health condition. And so, what do you say to folks that just keep on going? And I know you're talking about self, but sometimes, some of us feel like, the burdens that we have are so much greater, right?
Yeah.
Than taking the time out to, take care of ourselves. Both males and females. What are some of the ideas, the suggestions that you have to give voice to those folks who may be in organizations and who may have, additional burdens to just keep it moving?
Life, I have come to realize that the answer to many questions, to many challenges in life is simple, and it's about balance. And while, yes, America had to reopen, I think it's important to certainly keep it moving. I think it's important to instill in oneself and to instill in our people, in our community. We may be knocked down, we may stumble, we may fall, but it's important to get up. But we have to understand that you may need a little time to rebuild yourself. And so for those people who are very involved in the community and are the ones that are motivating and inspiring and continuing with the flow of, keeping other people uplifted, that's great. Mm-hmm. But I also say it's important to get into a routine of saying regularly, you know what, I'm going to take a step back for a minute. Things are not going to fall apart after a day or taking a weekend off or a vacation, and just, rebuilding, resting, reflecting, and then you become rejuvenated. Because if you continue to go and go and go, that's where burnout occurs. And once the burnout occurs, because it takes so long for it to, come to fruition, then it's so much harder to rekindle that flame. And I think that's when so many people have just, they're just, when they're tired, they're exhausted because they've just been going for so long and they have not allowed themselves, this is where the self-care comes into play, to just take a moment to regroup, to rest, to regroup, and then continue on with their journey, with the continuation, with their commitment to the community. Because it is important, but again, you cannot serve others if you don't serve yourself. I saw a question in here. I gotta find it. It was about, what do you say to people who are angry and feel justified participating in violence? I do not justify violence. But I do believe that, unfortunately, again, and this is where people get angry because their actions are twisted, misinterpreted. There's a difference between revolting. There's a difference between coming together and rallying and producing violence. A lot of America has turned so many of the movements into a negative thing. One, because they're in denial. They don't want to accept, the history. And accepting history does not necessarily mean that you as a person are responsible for what happened in the past, but you are responsible for what happens in the present and certainly in the future. And then secondly, America was built on revolution. And we celebrate it and we study it and we encourage our children to read about it from kindergarten. The problem is that certain groups of people in population African Americans, people of color, are not afforded that same right. And because of that, we are woke, we are awakened, and we're speaking out about that and saying we have a right to speak up. But in terms of violence, for me, that is not the act. That's not the ends to the means.
But I definitely heard, what you said earlier, which is find an outlet, find a means of expression, take a break, shut it down, say no, give yourself permission to leave, and give yourself permission to rest. And find your voice. That was the loudest message that I received today. Because those are very easy things to say, Ms. Kelly, but when you're actually in the workplace, when you're living under very stressful circumstances where you feel like, you have to conduct yourself in a certain way, you have to be better than everybody else, you have to, make sure that, not only do you get there on time, but you get there earlier, you're always sort of representing your people, and it hurts my neck, and, it is really something that we take on because of family and leaders, but I just so appreciate the message about permission, consent, informed, and always encouraging people to educate themselves, and to be kind to one another, because if it starts there, we won't have to do 35, 40 years of repair. When you begin to have experiences at a very, very young age where you recognize difference, either because of your accent, your inability, to speak English, for example, or how you look, because you're Black, and the attacks that come. And they do come, and it's not a figment of our imagination. We certainly realize the Southern Poverty Law Center has documented that there have been an increase of personal attacks, on people of color. Violence, towards individuals has increased. Along with, our visibility and our pushback, comes, other negative things our way as well. And I think we need to acknowledge that in our society, and to help educate, everyone with respect to, permission to take a break and to heal. And that is really the focus.
Yes, to heal.
Thank
and
you
know
so
what?
much.
You mentioned something, Doris, about the pressure that so many of us feel because we're not just speaking for ourselves. We're speaking for our people. We're speaking for people who don't. I used to say who don't have a voice, but it's really, we all have a voice, but so many people don't realize the true power in their voice. And so we're speaking for them. And that's a big responsibility. And I think all of us here today, we were raised, that's why we're doing what we do. That's why we're in this, on this Zoom today, is because we know the responsibility that we gladly accept. But with that comes at times a heavy burden. And so it's okay to say, you know what? I'm not speaking for everybody. I'm just speaking for myself through my personal, my professional experience. And that's important too, but sometimes we just gotta let go of that burden, not take it on for that particular day.
Absolutely.
I think it's important as well when you mentioned speaking for our people, right? Or the people, depending upon your background. It is exhausting to do that, right? So even though this is, what the three of us I know have been called to do, it is still exhausting. And while this is what the three of us have been called to do, most people have not been called to this work. So because we are now in a safe place for you guys to be able to ask questions, does not mean that you get to go back to your coworkers and say, hey, so I was in this workshop earlier today, and I want to ask you fill in the blank about being Black, Latina, whatever. That's not appropriate, right? There are certain people in certain places where you have that opportunity. Anything outside of that is called research. Like you got to go read a book or go sign up for another class or something.
That's
But
self-care.
it is not the responsibility of Black people to teach the rest of the world what it's like to be Black. Like we didn't create this paradigm, right? The other side to that, I was thinking about microaggressions and how it plays into what you were both speaking about. And a good one is, like you're so well spoken. When people say, well, what is a microaggression? Oh, Kelly, you are so well spoken. Well, yes, I am, but I'm not well spoken because I'm Black.
Right.
Right? I speak well. I can speak rings and laps around most people, regardless of their race, ethnicity, background, first language. I am well spoken as an individual, period.
Yes.
Right? So to ascribe that to someone of color immediately means that as a person of color, you speak well. Because I have never, in my 43 years, doesn't mean it hasn't happened, but I've never heard that term used for a white person.
Never. I've never heard it.
Right. And so this notion of, even when we look at cultures, and I work at ECNC, and this misunderstanding that Black people grieving loud means that there's a intervention needed by staff or police or whatever, right? That is a cultural thing that we as a greater American culture need to understand that people grieve differently. So when I want us to be aware of what those microaggressions look like and what is acceptable for Kelly and I to say, Kelly Coran, there's three of us, and I to say, or for Doris and I to say, is not acceptable for a person that is white to have that same conversation with us. Why? It just is what it is, right? So you just have to accept that. It is what it is until a whole lot of other things change. You have to go find or create a safe place for like-minded people to be able to talk.
Yes, absolutely. And I'd like to be able to lift up a comment in the chat, which was that one of our attendees was kind of taught to develop, pig skin, thick skin in response to racism, and not to allow those attacks to get through to you and your center of your being. And it sort of almost forces you to just have this iron facade.
Strong.
Right.
But it really does not acknowledge a fundamental hurt, right? And a fundamental area that we all need to heal. And I think that that is very, very powerful. And so I want to thank you ladies so much for your wisdom here today. Many folks in the chat have already spoken to some of the transparency and the honesty. We recognize that these are extremely difficult conversations to have. Our conversations in this series are really cumulative. We have discussed many of the related topics in this area very specifically, right? In terms of the actual disparities and the numbers, but we thought it was very important to be able to, touch on the issue of structural racism and the impact that it has on one's, physical body, certainly, your mental health and your attitude and your overall perspective on what your responsibility is, right, relative to your family, your community, and then the society. So
Doris, you're muted.
You just muted yourself.
Doris, you muted yourself. Unmute yourself, Doris.
One more time.
Thank you so much, guys. And so, I really do appreciate, the ability to have these open conversations because, like you said, we will find our places to have these conversations in private, but recognizing that, we all need to lift ourselves in healing because, this persistent and consistent environment of discrimination and hurt really does have to begin with healing. Nothing like, two great therapists and leaders in the field to help us to take a different look at it and to, give voice to that pain. So thank you so much for that. And to those of you who are with us, we have these critical conversations because they center on our shared value and commitment to closing disparities and inequities in our city and region, and collaborate across organizations and sectors so we can really strategically align our efforts. So we will continue to remain solution focused and will report out on our collective efforts as we make progress towards, what we define as your racial equity solutions, so we can meet, the needs of our community that are so crucial at this time in our nation's history. Last month, we talked about the racial equity dividend report and the opportunities identified to close those gaps of those disparities highlighted in that report in our community. And we reviewed income and wealth inequalities in Buffalo and in our region. And with your help, we were able to get 30 individuals trained in racial equity impact analysis to help facilitate an understanding of systems and structural barriers and strengthen the capacity of our local leaders to engage in this work and advance equitable community change in our workplaces, organizations, and institutions. So we don't claim to have all the answers. In fact, we encourage you to explore other forums and discussions to gauge different viewpoints, understanding. But here at the United Way of Buffalo and Erie County, we remain committed to restoring and rebuilding organizations that are more equitable, and we'll continue to report out on our progress. So thank you so much for joining us today. Please save the date. Our next session will be November 19th at 2 p.m. And you will receive an invitation, and we hope that you join us at that time. We'll have a month to be able to report out on our progress with those folks who took that training, and what are those barriers that are being identified so that we can address them and then align resources so that when we rebuild, in this time, we'll do it in an equitable manner. We'll have a more equitable city and a more equitable region. So thank you so much to the presenters, all of you. We appreciate you for being with us at this time, and be safe until next month. Take care. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us, guys.
Thank you.